Hi, my name is Jason Ettinger, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the advocacy panel for the community forum this year with a general topic of how to advocate for yourself or for a loved one. We'll be starting out the panel with Carol and Benjamin Schrader, who will speak with us about playgrounds, presidents, and parking spaces, a mom and son perspective on breaking barriers. Then we'll hear from Spencer Bowersox, a social worker at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, who will teach us about Paddle, a tool he uses for advocating and to empower families. And finally, Allison Morse, who's a senior manager for advocacy and family engagement at Easter Seals in Ontario, will speak with us about effective parent advocacy and education. I think this is an outstanding group of speakers, and I thoroughly enjoyed the presentations and learned from it. I hope you will as well. Have a wonderful day. Hello, everyone. I am here with Carol and Benjamin Schrader, who are going to speak to us as part of the advocacy panel for the community forum. They're going to talk with us about playgrounds, presidents, and parking spaces, a mom and son perspective on breaking barriers. Carol Mason Schrader is mother to young adult triplets, 2 of whom have cerebral palsy, plus a teenage daughter. Her then 11-year-old son, Mason, created a blog, The Blessing Counter, and encouraged her to write. His willingness to have his story told so that even just one family could find hope in the journey of raising children with cerebral palsy inspires her still. She has shared the story of her family around the world and recently wrote a children's book, Helix Rolls into a Sleepover, where a cute little tourist gives a glimpse into life with wheels. She serves as policy director for the Delaware State Council for Persons with Disabilities, where ironically, her son Benjamin has just been elected chair, making him her boss. Benjamin Schrader is an activist with cerebral palsy. He is the director of RISE, or Redefining Independence with Social Empowerment, a fledgling self-advocacy group dedicated to giving people with disabilities a space to unlock their best selves. He is also the chair of Delaware State Council for Persons with Disabilities, and in his spare time, he enjoys reviewing movies, reading about theme parks, and memorizing Star Wars trivia. So thank you both for being here, and I can't wait to see what you guys have to share.
Well, we're excited to be here. Thank you, Jason.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
So we're just going to dive right in, if that's okay.
Please do.
I need to be completely honest before we even get started and tell you that my screen's not moving. Okay, that's not what I want to tell you. I want to be completely honest and tell you that when I took the triplets to their 1-year-old checkup, the pediatrician asked me how they were doing with solid foods. You don't remember that, right?
No, that's a little too far back.
That's a blessing, because what I need you to know is I stared at her blankly. I had no idea what the triplets did with solid foods because I'd not given them any. I knew that it took 24 to 28 bottles a day to keep everyone fed, and that means everyone happy. I knew which baby liked which pureed veggie, fruit, and meat. I knew who had to be fed first, Mason, and who was content to wait until last, Claire. That means you were always second.
Yeah, always in the middle.
But it had never once occurred to me that I needed to transition them to solid food. I had my system down pat, thank you very much. And frankly, I thought we were good to go. I didn't know why we would need to mess with it. I went home after her gentle encouragement, and I made grilled cheese sandwiches. Mason, seen here in the red, ate 3 in one sitting. They loved them. They all 3 loved them. Mason the most.
Yes.
Now, I am telling you this because there were times after the boy, in those early days after the boys were diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and I was navigating the waters for the first time, that it seemed to me that every single mother whose child was diagnosed with CP immediately formed a foundation or became an advocate extraordinaire. They became this champion for the cause. And money was raised and worlds were transformed. And all the while, I was barely keeping my 3 fed. I need you to know this because I don't want you to think, listening to me today, that I immediately began building playgrounds and talking to college presidents. As a matter of fact, most days, I still feel like I spend an exorbitant amount of time making sure everybody is fed, right?
That's true.
Okay, so with that out of the way, and you completely aware of all the things, here we go. We literally went from transitioning to solid food to my trio being ready for preschool. Seriously, I think I blinked. The admission meeting for our little preferred school, Buttonwood, was very enlightening. The teacher said, "Can Claire dress herself?" Me, no, but is that a thing she should be doing? Because that would really help me a lot. The teacher, well, can they use scissors? And me, how would I know? I have 3-year-old triplets. We don't have any scissors in our house. You get the idea. Preschool was 2 mornings a week for 2 hours. I was a nervous wreck. And frankly, the triplets loved it. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I remember that. We had lots of puppets too, like in the slide.
And you loved puppets?
Yeah, very much so.
And then it was time to visit kindergartens and think about their formal education. It didn't start smoothly. I loaded my babies and we went to visit the private school in our area that all my girlfriends, frankly, were sending their children. I have to fight tears just telling you that the headmaster sat across from the 4 of us and he said, "Mrs. Schrader, this is what I can do. We'll enroll your children in kindergarten on a 3-month probationary period. If in 3 months it proves too challenging for my teachers, I will have to ask you to move on to a different school." I got to tell you, looking back at that moment, I wasn't yet an advocate. I had not even found my mama bear voice adequately. But something rose up in me that day and I looked at him. I said, "Really? And you think starting their formal education on probation is the best way to help Benjamin, Mason, and Claire be successful? I can't even imagine the stress that would put on them and put on us as a family. No, thank you. Really, no, thank you." We visited a lot of other schools before landing on our local neighborhood school, the little public elementary school. The principal was warm and welcoming, and the teachers in no way made us feel burdensome. And yet, 3 days into kindergarten, Mason burst into tears when I picked them up for school. "I can't play with my friends. They won't let me go down to the playground," he said. I didn't even have any idea what was going on. It was the 3rd day of kindergarten. We're just loading the van. I didn't know what to do, but the mama bear inside of me said, "Well, I'll fix it. Don't worry. I will fix it." I was in the principal's office the next morning as soon as I dropped them off at school. The playground is old and it's down in a ravine, she explained. It would be dangerous for Mason to even try to get to it. Benjamin can't, possibly in his wheelchair. She told me that she had petitioned for a new playground to be built on flat land right behind the school, but it wasn't high on the district's priority. They told her they'd get around to it, but it would probably be 10 years. 10 years. My children would need it in 10 years. I was desperate. So I said the first thing that came to my mind without even much thought, which was, what if I raise the money? If I raise the money separately from the school, can we build an accessible playground? She said she would support it 100%. Y'all, I was so naive about the barriers we would face. I never imagined resistance to an accessible playground, but I was undeterred. I could board you with all the weird obstacles, the PTA officer who didn't want to get behind our project, to the older lady who called me following a news segment on the boys and said that she was writing a check, but she needed me to promise her that only those 2 cute little boys on TV would play on that playground. I tried to explain inclusion to her, but she couldn't understand. Our biggest obstacle, however, was that at the end of that school year, we'd only raised about half of what we needed. I'd wanted that playground built and ready when 1st grade started, and I didn't really see a way that was going to happen. We kept working to raise money, but we were really discouraged. And then in July, we got a phone call. the accessible playground company, or the playground company, had actually put together an accessible playground for their catalog photo shoot. The salesman, knowing how hard we were working for Benjamin and Mason, offered us that playground at cost. And I say that, I mean, we needed a couple of $1,000 more for him to build it. The school district happily chipped that money in, and we started first grade with a playground that allowed my boys to be included with their friends. We started first grade with a way to participate in the most important aspect of elementary school, recess. I'm just going to be totally honest here. With that success, I felt pretty confident we could bulldoze our way over every single obstacle that we ever encountered. Mama Bear was on it, right? I was feeling pretty good about myself. In the middle of that first semester of first grade, Benjamin got in trouble. You remember this?
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately.
He needed a bathroom break at what was an apparent inopportune time for his teacher's day. His aide would take him to the bathroom. Benjamin didn't want to wait for her to do all the cleaning up she had to do afterwards because he would miss class. So he wanted to drive himself back to his classroom. His teacher, however, insisted that her door be closed. She felt strongly about it. And so without his aid, Benjamin could not get back into the classroom. So this bright boy, not wanting to miss any more school than necessary, devised a way to alert his classmates to open the door. Do you remember?
Yes.
You want to tell him?
Yes. So I came up with the way I decided that my chair would be like something of a battering ram. I don't know. You have to remember this was the early 2000s, so the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. So I don't know. Maybe I saw it, but I didn't. I determined that I would knock with my chair by running it up against the door.
And you can see from the picture, he had a tray around his wheelchair that helped him do his schoolwork. So he just rammed that into the door. I thought it was brilliant. His friends came, they opened the door, he came in, school commenced. A few days in though, teacher met me at the door when I picked him up and strongly encouraged us that we should come up with a new system, that this wasn't working. I was pretty mad about it. I thought he was brilliant. She wasn't willing to bend her rules, so I thought he had done what he could to come up with an idea. So by the time I put him to bed that night, I was fairly fuming and trying very hard to hold it in. So you can imagine when I hear him crying after the kids had been in bed for half an hour, I assumed I knew exactly why he was crying. This teacher was really stealing his joy. I went to kneel beside his little bed. "Mama," he said. "Yes, baby, what is it?" "Mama, I'm worried." "About what, sweetheart?" "I can fix it." And remember, I thought I could.
Yeah, she was very proud of herself.
Do you remember?
Yes.
You want to tell him?
I said, "Mom, when I'm worried that when I'm elected president of the United States, they won't let you come live in the White House."
He wasn't worried about that teacher at all. Sometimes the most important barriers are those we construct ourselves, worrying about things that don't matter to our children. We compromised in first grade. The teacher agreed to leave the door open, and Benjamin agreed not to ram things with his chair.
No more battering rams.
And I promised that I would get to live in the White House with him were he ever to be elected president. But some years later, we found compromise to be a challenge.
Right.
When the elementary school moved Benjamin and Mason's classrooms to the second floor, we needed a fire plan to get them out of the school. It was discussed in the preschool year IEP meeting. It was discussed the first week of school. It was discussed the second week and the third week. And when the first week of November rolled around and we still didn't have a fire plan, I was near tears in the principal's office. We had to have a plan. 2 days later, while watching her siblings practice in the band hall, and not quite 2-year-old baby Kate mischievously pulled the bright red shiny thing that was behind her head. It was the fire alarm. Bells and whistles and sirens started going off, and everyone began to evacuate. A panicked principal ran upstairs to see where Benjamin and Mason were because she knew she didn't have a plan to get them out of the building. And she knew it wasn't a drill. She didn't know the baby sister had done it. The next day, we had a fire plan in place. 5th and 6th grade presented other challenges. Physical adaptations needed to be made in order for Benjamin and Mason to fully participate in classroom assignments. Sometimes teachers did it well, other times not so much. In hindsight, I wish I had engaged with an advocate to attend IEP meetings with me from the beginning. I assumed that everyone had the boys' best interest at heart, and often I truly believe they did. But the fact is, teachers don't know what they don't know. And often, our children are the first children that look like this, that learn like this, that are in those classrooms. And they haven't learned yet how to brainstorm. When Benjamin had to build a Rube Goldberg experiment, for example, in 5th grade,
very vividly remember this.
He was told just to tell your mom what you would do and she'll write it down.
It was very demeaning, one of the most demeaning experiences I had ever had.
Mason's teacher, on the other hand, gave him a computer program where you combined simple machines to catch Tom and Jerry, or for Tom to catch Jerry, or
for Tom to catch Jerry.
Anyway, he did a computer version of a Rube Goldberg. I don't know if you need to think about which one of my boys understands what a Rube Goldberg is the best. I'm going to say Mason.
I eventually got there, but I was at a severe disadvantage.
As quickly as we went from baby bottles to grilled cheese sandwiches, it was time to look for colleges. We knew the heart of the school would have to be right for the boys. We visited schools who talked about disability in a complete other language. You know, the disabled do this, or the blind do that. Really, that's a true example. We didn't want that. We wanted schools that welcomed Benjamin and Mason. We visited, Mason and I visited, we were touring one of his school choices. When after a parent session, I asked the dean if he could provide, and I gave him my comprehensive list of things I thought Mason needed to be successful. The dean was very kind as we walked across campus, and I introduced him to Mason, and the first thing he said was, "It's nice to meet you, Mason. I know what your mom thinks you need to be successful. What do you think you need to be successful?" Mason's list was much shorter than mine. Mason chose Millsaps because of that dean. These pictures are little Mason digging for bones in a dinosaur graveyard at Disney World, and college Mason digging all over the continent for human bones. He's an archaeologist. His list was exactly what he needed, and he knew he had found the school that worked for him. I want Benjamin to talk to you about his college experience, some of the issues and some of the highlights.
Yep. So by the time I got to college, as you can imagine, I thought I was pretty, at breaking down barriers, but nothing quite could prepare me for the sense of sort of frozenness I felt in my heart when I heard the English professor. I should preface by saying I was in advanced comp. They told me that's what happens when you're smart. I'm still taking that one by faith, but nevertheless, I was there. And nothing could quite prepare me for when the professor said, we're going to have an impromptu test, but I want you to take out this first day of class. Impromptu test, obviously you don't need to study, just take out a piece of paper and write it down, but you have to write it down now. It has to be your thoughts now. And I just felt this cold illness inside, and it felt like forever. It was probably only a minute or two, but the professor walks over to me, and if you've seen the show Parks and Recreation, the character Ron Swanson, and has a similar tone to this professor. He says to me, and I'll never forget it as long as I live, "I'm going to make a rash and impetuous assumption here, sir, that you have an alternative means of delivery for this sort of thing." And as soon as I was able to process what all those words meant, putting to test whether I really belonged in advanced comm, I stammered out something like, yes, I can do it on my computer when I get home." He's like, "Great, and then you can just get it to me in that format." Next day, the professor walks in, and he's very eager to assign me, or assign a quote unquote vice president of Ben, someone to take my notes so that I can be engaged in the class. And I'll tell you what this professor, his name is Dr. Ugley, understood, that I think so often we, as disabled folks and the families and advocates, don't understand, is that true independence, it doesn't happen alone, right? The true barrier breaking doesn't happen alone. I mean, think about it, it was by accident, but it took little baby Kate to make sure we had a fire plan in place. And that story and the story of that English class are really the stories at the heart of what I think makes advocacy work. We're strongest when we stand together, and the barriers come tumbling down when we stand together.
And I think that's something that you articulate and voice very often, is that in the world, we tend to think that to be independent means you're going to live alone and you're going to be able to navigate things all by yourself. And what we found through college is that for Benjamin, independence
it requires quite a lot of people.
It does require a team, and that does not make him less independent. It just means that we're smart enough to know what he needs to have in place. And so I wish that young me had understood that that I needed a team, that I didn't need to do it alone when I was trying to figure out all of the IEP meetings. Benjamin has taught me so much about the fact that independence and standing on his own literally look like him sitting and rolling and having a team of people to assist him. And so what we were able to put in place for college was that he had a team that helped him navigate sidewalks where his vision acuity became a challenge. And we had a team that could help him live on campus in the dorms without a parent there, right?
But it was me living my best self, doing, studying what I wanted to study, and that's why you heard my group was called Rise, because it's redefining independence and social empowerment. It's this idea that we need to build up a community together.
Now, we did say that in our title, we were talking about college presidents. So I thought we should add the anecdote about how even with a good team and a mama bear on your side, some days, there are still the mail delivery or package delivery or security officers are going to park in the loading zone next to the accessible ramp and block you from even getting up the sidewalk. And we tried to be sweet about it for months and waited out, see if people would move, because Benjamin literally couldn't go to school because people were blocking the ramp to the sidewalk. And when it didn't change, and when we contacted security, and when we contacted UPS, and when we contacted the mailman, and when we contacted the dean of accessibility, and none of it got changed, we may have called the college president.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the very next week, all of the loading zones were repainted with big letters.
Yeah, with
that
a
said,
giant no parking,
No parking.
written on there.
So sometimes you need a mama bear. All the time you need a great attitude, willing to educate those around you. You sometimes need a whole team of people.
Yes,
usually.
Often, very often.
And then maybe a phone call to a president.
Yes.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
Benjamin is going to continue to advocate and to teach self-advocacy. His passion is to make sure everyone in Delaware, anyway, at this point, knows and understands how to define independence. And that it's important to define it in such a way that empowers our other friends who have disabilities. We're going to spread that word, and we're committed to it.
Yes.
I think what you said, we accomplish more together.
Yes. And that's what I know many of you watching are all committed to that as well. So thank you so much for listening to us today. It's been a real honor.
Thank you.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Spencer Bowersox, who is a practicing social worker at Children's Hospital Pittsburgh. He graduated with his degree in Master's Social Work from University of Pittsburgh in 2018, along with his additional certificate in mental health. And I've had the pleasure to work with Spencer as part of his role at the social worker for the Technology Assisted Children's Home Program at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, in which he assisted and supported individuals with complex medical conditions, as well as helping their families navigate psychosocial and medical concerns while promoting support and empowerment. Recently, he's transitioned to the neonatal ICU at Children's Hospital, where he supports and ensures caregivers and parents are provided dignity and respect during a difficult and likely unanticipated event related to the birth of their child. Thank you, Spencer, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on using on how to approach advocacy in the healthcare setting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to present on how you can try to advocate for your child or an individual that you're supporting. I am currently a social worker in the NICU at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. So while I was thinking about this presentation, I was thinking about the things that I do to help and support the families that I work with on a daily basis. And so hopefully you find it to be helpful. And I'll use an example while we're going through it to try to bring it back into focus to see how you could potentially use this in your daily practice. And hopefully it will provide fruitful situations for you. So the tool that we're going to be using is something that I made up. It's called Paddle. And Paddle stands for the first letter being P, plan and prepare. So that, sometimes people say plan and prepare and you think, what the heck does that even mean? So I think the first step is write down what your goal is for the day, because I imagine while you're trying to figure out how to help and support the individual that you're with, that you might be overwhelmed by all the things that come up in a conversation. So write down what your goal is. I think it's also important to look over any information that might relate to that situation, legal, other community resources, and talking with other people about what they and their experiences were regarding the situation. I always think it's important to schedule a break or that moment of positive coping skills, because when you're taking time to advocate for others, it tends to be quite draining. And if you don't have a moment to take that break and think and reflect, you will become overwhelmed very quickly. I do this myself. If I'm overwhelmed trying to assist a family, I take that break because it's crucial while I'm working and helping others. And then I think it's also important to set obtainable goals, because you're not going to be able to solve something right away, and it's going to take time. It's going to take time for people to get back to you regarding that situation, and you can't put all the pressure on one day getting that resolved that moment. So I'll use an example. So in our area where I live in Pennsylvania, we have a program that assists with transportation to and from medical appointments. And so there's this particular city about 2 hours and 30 minutes away from our main hospital in Pittsburgh, that when I had first started my role with Dr. Ettinger, was not leaving their area to transport people down to appointments, which is their whole purpose of their program. So I was presented this problem from a family. It had been going on for quite some time before I even became a part of the program. And so I sat down and I wrote down all that I knew about this program. I wrote all the things that people had said that they had tried before in the past. I wrote down who I needed to speak to, things like that, because if I just call and hope that someone's going to answer my question, it's not going to happen, because I don't know who I'm asking for, what the goal is for that moment, and it takes time. So writing those things down is really important to keep yourself on track too, because you can easily fall deep inside a program trying to figure your way out very quickly, because there's so many different facets to each group. And I'll go through that example as we continue through paddle and try to relate it back to the situation. So the next one is ask. So ask is very broad, and I know that this might seem simple and lame, but it's important to ask questions, because you're not going to know the answer until you ask it. And the answer to your question might be no, but at least you know it's no, and it's not, oh, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if you directly ask someone, like, can this happen? It's going to make them think about that situation. And it's going to also allow you to have a formal conversation with that individual regarding your need. So always ask. There's never a dumb question. And I think another good thing to ask is the chain of command. So I'll bring it back to my example with that transportation program. You call into a standard number, you talk to a person who schedules a ride. They don't know their chain of command. So you can ask, who is your super? Like, who is someone above that might be able to assist me better with the information that I need to best assist a family? And so they think about it. They're like, okay, let's put you onto this person. And so I'm writing down, the hierarchy, the chain of command as I'm going through. And sometimes I have to go past a few people to get to what I need, but at least I know I can reflect back and say, I spoke to Jim Bob on the phone and he mentioned this. And you're keeping that record to remind yourself, one, what order you have to go in, and two, it's great when you need to reflect back when you take that break in the middle of you advocating for that individual. The next one is D, and D stands for diligence or patience. So you're not good, like I said before, you're not gonna figure out a situation right away. I did not figure out the transportation issue right away. It took many, many months. But it's really important that you've established, or at least tried to find good coping skills for yourself. And it's not to say that you are going to find a coping skill the moment you say, oh, reading a book is going to be the best for me. It might take a lot of trials to figure out which one's the best for you. And that's important. And that's something that you can have across your lifespan so that you can best cope with all this stuff and the stress that you're dealing with, because I imagine this is not the only thing that you do in a given day. I imagine there's many other things in your daily life outside of advocating for an individual that you do on a daily basis. So take time for your self-care. And patience is key. I know that's a very lame statement. We hear it a lot, but it really is, because with very large organizations, there's a processes, there's paperwork, there's things that have to be done in a certain order. And you have to just keep a timeline and be careful of, trying to rush a situation when it needs to just have, trying to be calm and to best understand what's going on next. The next D in paddle is documentation. So I write everything down. I will talk about writing everything down. I have to write it down. If I don't, I'm not going to remember it. It's so crucial. I do dates and times of my conversations, the people that I speak with. I pull up an Excel sheet. I use every color option available in Excel so that I can remind myself about those conversations I have with people. And it's important because, those people, they're not the only people that are talking to me. They're talking to other people, probably about similar situations. And so if I'm able to remind them, that helps me in continuing the chain of communication that I'm having with this individual so that I'm best supporting the cause that I'm trying to do. And the other thing, which is really important about documentation, and I hope that it never comes across any of you, but it is important, is if you have negative interactions with someone, having that information is so crucial so that you're able to go back and say, you know, I have this concern regarding a conversation I had with someone previously. And so that you set yourself up to that you're not being, you know, misconstrued or misinterpreted about your intention. So documentation is key, dates, times, names, and everything under the sun. The next letter is L, and L stands for local organization and communities. So you guys are a part of this conference. I imagine you found this on another website prior and another group from somewhere else. And it's really important that, you know, you look at those very large national organizations, but also take time to look at their website entirely. I imagine there's additional local, county, state, cities, more specific groups underneath those large groups. And sometimes you could probably find someone that's across the street with some similar, you know, similar life experiences. And I think that's important because people experience things at different times, and maybe there's someone that knows something that you never heard of, and maybe they know someone that can get you connected with someone who can assist you with that need that you have. But it also goes back to ask. You just don't know. If you're not asking, you don't know. So that's why I always say link yourself as much as possible. Try networking. Do things like this. And I always hesitate to say Facebook, and I know that there's great Facebook groups out there, and there's some that are really difficult and sometimes overwhelming to people. But it's worth taking a look if this is your first time trying to find people to support you and figure things out. It's a great place to start, but always proceed with caution with most things that you deal with so that you can best assist the person that you're working with. The E for paddle is empathy. So I imagine there are times that you find yourself explaining the same situation about the person that you care for, a loved one, over and over. And I imagine that is a very daunting and exhausting task. And there are people, unfortunately, that don't have those similar life experiences and will likely never understand exactly what you go through on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that you have to be, you know, extremely nice to these people, but it's important to keep in mind when you're having these conversations with people to try to be empathetic, because, you know, most of the time people are innately good, but it's important that you also feel comfortable with talking with someone. And it starts with, you know, trying to build any connection you possibly can so that you can better figure out next steps. And so I'll go back to the transportation situation again, as we've gone through paddle. So I did the P, which was planning. I wrote down everything that I had already known about the situation, reflecting back on it about previous times that people have tried to get this to work. I went up the hierarchy. I imagine I got up to the director at that point because it had become such a chronic situation. I had to be very patient and diligent with them because it's an organization outside of my own my skill set. We don't learn about transportation programs in school. So being very patient and like understanding that this isn't going to happen overnight, but that they're aware of who I am and that there's an urgent need to assist families in their community. And documentation, that was crucial. There was many times where I would talk to individuals and they had completely forgotten any conversation we had. And I was able to say, you know, on this day, we had talked about this. Did we have any follow-up from that? And it would jog the memory. They're searching on their email, looking for that last email chain. And so I feel like that assisted during that time. And the empathy part, people they're doing their best. They are. And you just have to be kind, and you catch more flies with honey. So I think it's really important that you try to be as kind as possible, but you know, it's really up to the people that you interact with. And you know, some other ways to use paddle, you can use this in school when you're going to meetings to advocate for your child for specific educational goals. You can do this when you're in a hospital setting if you feel that you're not being heard about your concerns regarding your child or your loved one. You can do this in your own life, in your daily life, at work. It really the reason I made it was in hopes that it could go across any event, any lifespan, any situation that you might find. And by all means, you can take paddle and you can throw it in the trash, that's fine, but you can also use whatever you want from it. It's completely yours. It's a universal tool that I hope that you find to be helpful. And by all means, if you find anything to be helpful, please share it with others and spread the information that you find while you're trying to advocate for your individual.
Thank you very much, Spencer. That was great. And I think that can be applicable in so many ways, right? So if someone were having a hard time getting a piece of equipment covered by insurance, you could use this tool to try to engage through there. Maybe meet a difficult clinician in the hospital and trying to figure out your way around that. Or, and I'll say, I think some of the most effective parents or people I've worked with in clinic have often been ones who have that. As you talk about this, I'm envisioning this notebook that unfolds that has dates and times, and that can be a really effective way, and I think impressive way when you're talking to someone and say, but on this date, this is when this happened, and we talked about this. It would be a really effective way to communicate. Well,
yeah, I agree. Yes, having a binder is not a bad thing if you need to lug it around just to keep yourself on track. It makes complete sense to do. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce to you Allison Morse, who is going to speak with us on how to be an effective parent with regards to advocacy and education. Ms. Morse is the Senior Manager of Advocacy and Family Engagement for Easter Seals in Ontario. In this position, Allison is responsible for government relations and advocacy. She manages the Easter Seals Special Education Advisory Committee program and has been an SEAC member since 1992. She participates in government consultations and prepares position papers. Most recently, she is a member of the Education Accessibility Standards Development Committee for kindergarten to grade 12. Allison is also the lead for enhancing child and family support by providing information, engaging families in workshops, and seeking child and family advice for the organization. She has also been providing parent workshops for almost 30 years and has developed a variety of articles to support families on the Easter Seals Kids at School website. Allison has been an advocate for children with special needs for over 30 years and founded the Ontario Association for Families of Children with Communication Disorders in 1994. She is also the parent of a young woman who has cerebral palsy. It's a great pleasure that I introduce Ms. Morse. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jason, for the kind introduction. So as Jason said, I work with Easter Seals Ontario, which is a provincial organization, so the whole province of Ontario, and we provide support to children and youth with disabilities, physical disabilities that impact their mobility. We are different to other Easter Seals organizations because they are all independent at the state level or the provincial level, and that we focus very much on physical disability, and more than half of our caseload is children with cerebral palsy. So some of the things I'm going to talk about today in terms of the parent roles in education. All parents should support the student at home, be involved in school activities, and communicate regularly with the classroom teacher and address concerns as they arise. So this is really part of developing a positive relationship with the school. You don't want to always be seen as the parent that's complaining. You want to be there to show that you're involved and committed, ask questions that are relevant to any child, not just a child with disability, and participate in as many school activities as you can. Not everyone can help out with Pizza Fridays or other weekly activities, but there may be some other roles for you in terms of supporting field trips or other activities. And that all builds your relationship with the school. Parent role in special education include attending case conferences or school team meetings, or providing input into the development and monitoring of the individual education plan. In the next few slides, I'm going to give you some suggestions about how to do these things effectively. What we want is a parent that is an effective advocate for their child. So starting school. I sort of did this a little bit chronologically. I'm not sure how many of you are ready to start school or are already in school, but I thought let's start right from the beginning. So one of the things we have to reinforce is that you need to register your child like any other child at school. And there frequently are in the year before your child starts school, there may be some parent evenings in the school or in the community where you can learn about what happens in kindergarten. If you've got some connections to special needs resources, they may also be talking to you about what programs and services you can expect at the school. Your next job is to share information about the child with the school. I've heard over and over again parents saying, no, I don't want to disclose. I want them to see what the child can do before we talk about what their challenges are. And I'll push back and say, without the full information about your child's strengths and needs, the school is going to struggle to support your child. So it's really important that you share information about your child. It is at your discretion how much and what level of detail you share, but the more open you can be in terms of planning with the school, the better supported your child will be at school. So as you get into the transition process to school, participate in meetings or case conferences. So sometimes the organizations that are supporting your child as a preschooler will arrange the conference. Sometimes the school will arrange, but it's really important that you attend these meetings, and you may want to bring some additional people with you to that meeting that can share information about your child. For example, if your child's in a preschool program, you might want a teacher from that program to come and talk about your child. It's all about building a good picture, so that's why these meetings are very, very important. And then the other job as a parent is to prepare your child for the transition to school. Although we presume that most children have been into some sort of organized childcare, many, many children have not been. They may have attended a few library programs or community programs, but they may not be ready for that full day experience. So there are things you can do to prepare them for that transition. Visits to the school and the playground help them to become familiar. If you have an opportunity for a tour, that's a good way to see around the building and show them where they're going to be. But also in terms of activities, preparing them so that they are ready to be sitting in circle time, that they know that they need to listen to the instructions that are being given, and also giving them the opportunity to ask questions and explore the environment on their own. One of the big items I always suggest that parents put together is something called a parent resource binder. I typically use a blue binder, and in that I capture all of the reports and information about my child, whether it's health, clinical, or assessments related to education. So I have them all in one piece. I also talk about the fact that this binder demonstrates that you are as professional as anyone else in that meeting. You've come prepared, and you have your information organized, and then you can hold it up as somewhat of a shield in terms of making sure that you are feeling that you aren't vulnerable and that you have some strengths to offer in that meeting. So in that parent resource binder, you can start to organize sections for report cards, for IEPs, for meeting notes, for any other types of meetings you have. And so then the next time you have a meeting or you're being consulted on the IEP, you have it all at your fingertips. In one section, especially for those of you that are starting school, have a child starting school, I suggest you put an all about me section. In this, you really focus on the things you know about your child that you want to share. So that could be things like their likes and dislikes, their interest in extracurricular, perhaps they're involved in dance or baseball, any special talents or abilities they have, family relationships and dynamics. This is not about sharing all your personal business, but if it's a shared custody situation, that needs to be shared up front so that they know who has access to your child, who they can share information with, for example. But also providing a picture of who lives in the home. Maybe grandma lives in the home as well, and so that's good information to know that it's an extended family situation. And then you can share information about family routines and schedules that help your child. What are the things that you've been using at home that really support your child? Now, you don't have to share all that, but at least you've got it. The other thing that you can put in an all about me binder is the important contact numbers. So when they ask you who should we telephone, what's their telephone number, or email. So you have all that already when you first go to the meeting. So that binder really becomes a valuable resource for organizing information that you may want to share. I've talked about the transition to school in terms of the planning that you need to do in attending meetings and the things you can do for your child. But at that first meeting where you're talking about the transition to school, some of the things that you might want to talk about and make sure you include in the meeting is getting to school transportation. Many children with cerebral palsy have limited physical mobility, and they may require specialized transportation or support on the bus. And so it's important to talk about that. In terms of accessibility, what are their accessibility needs and what is the new environment going to look like? Is there a door that is going to be accessible for her or him to use in getting into the kindergarten or other grade 1 room? Is the other facilities in the school accessible? Is there an accessible washroom, for example? When they go to the playground, what kind of substance is on the playground? Is it accessible? Is your child going to be able to move their wheelchair across the surface? Equipment uses and storage. Often there is equipment that's required to be used at school that might have to stay at school. So for example, if they normally are using a wheelchair, they may need to have a walker to use for parts of the day at school. So is there going to be space in the classroom to store that walker? Communication skills is a really important thing to talk about. Many children with cerebral palsy can be difficult to understand. So you need to talk to the school about how your child communicates and what effective strategies you've developed in order to improve understanding by yourself and others. And it may be that you're using an augmentative or alternative communication system. You may be using some sort of picture book, but really talk about that and find out what else can be used in the classroom to help your child be a good participant. And then what help your child will require with personal health care. Are they going to need help with their lunch? Do they have a feeding tube? Do they have require a special assistant to help them with their feeding? Do they need help with toileting? So these are some of the things you need to talk about in the transition meeting to be a strong advocate for your child, but also to make sure that your child ends up in an environment that supports them to be successful. As I said, sharing daily routines and things that work for your child is also really important. So I mentioned earlier that it's really important to build a positive relationship with the school. So some of the specifics that I think are important is sharing good news stories. When your child has a good day or was really excited to share or show you something that they did that day, provide positive feedback to the teacher. Let them know that your child had a good day or enjoyed a specific activity or felt really successful in something that they did that day. So often we only go to the teacher in the school when things are wrong, but it's really important to be able to share those positive news stories as well. Then if you have a concern, you need to talk to the staff involved as soon as possible. We talk about problems that can grow until they seem like an insurmountable mountain that we're going to have to get over. But the sooner you talk about the problem, and you need to talk about it in a fairly neutral way, describing what the issues are and asking what it looks like from the teacher's perspective. Sometimes the information you get from your child may not be fully accurate. So it's really important to sort of test out what the school's perception of what's happening is. And then once you can get some agreement on what the issue is, or then you need to do some brainstorming around solutions. So really come prepared. If you've got an issue that you're concerned about, come prepared with 1 or 2 solutions that you think might work. I hear over and over again that what parents believe is what their child needs is an educational assistant that supports them one-to-one. I don't believe, and there's a lot of evidence to show, that only a very few children actually need that level of support. Occasional support around specific tasks or activity can be just as effective. So really remember to really focus on what it is that you want the help with. So if you think your child is not getting any connections with other children in the playground, let's talk about what supports you could provide in the playground. It's not always an EA. If the situation is not resolved, you need to go to the next senior staff. So if there's a department head, that's the next person that you should take it to. If there's a head of special education, you could also talk to them. The important thing is not to escalate to the principal or higher in the school board unless you've been through all of the people that are below them. Very important to follow what we would call the chain of command, that you've talked to the appropriate people and made multiple efforts to resolve a problem. Tips for successful advocacy. So know your child. Now, when I started out on my journey to cerebral palsy, I didn't know what it was. I sort of understood that, oh, it's somebody that probably can't talk or walk and is going to be in a wheelchair. But once I had my child diagnosed with cerebral palsy, I learned that it was actually a continuum, that there are all kinds of levels of disability under that heading of cerebral palsy. So you need to know about your child and where they fit on that cerebral palsy spectrum. And you need to know what are the things that are challenging for them as an individual. Never forget that although you're not a professional in the education system, you are the professional that represents your child. You're the person that has the expertise and knowledge about your child, and you're going to be the only person that stays connected to your child throughout their school career. So go to every meeting at the school. Sometimes it's not possible, so you need to ask for it to be rescheduled at a convenient time that you can go, or maybe you do have to take time off work because it's really important that you attend these meetings. Organize your child's records. I've talked about the advantage of having them stored in a binder. I know a lot of parents prefer to do everything electronic, and so you could develop an electronic binder. And then you've got to figure out in terms of access, am I going to access it at the meetings? Am I going to be able to have it on my phone? So you need to figure out what's going to be the best way for you to organize your information about your child. Next thing is that you're working with your child's teacher as a collaborator. It's together that you're going to support the education of your child. You have information to provide, the teacher has expertise that she can share, and together you're going to come up with the solutions that work for your child. It's also important to know your rights and responsibilities. I'm not talking about them in this presentation because they do vary by jurisdiction. So in what is practice in Ontario may not be the practice in the state that you live in or the province you live in. So it's really important to know what is the parental rights, the child's rights, what are your roles and responsibilities in the special education system. And that takes a long time to learn. So I would encourage you to attend professional workshops, which are held by organizations or the school, to learn about the programs and services, and also to read as much as you can. Potentially the school website might be a place where you can find a lot of information. So the more information you have, the better equipped you are going to be to advocate for your child. Next, what I really think is a very important piece is involve your child. Now, at that starting school, kindergarten preparation stage, it may not be appropriate to have your child at the meeting, but you could perhaps ask them some of the whether they have any questions about school that you could take on their behalf, or whether they have any concerns that they would like you to share on their behalf. I think it's really important that we raise young people that are able to be self-advocates, and that starts at a young age. So there may come a point when it's very appropriate to have the child or student attend the individual education planning meetings. This, I think, is particularly true of high school age students who may have to advocate themselves with some of the different teachers that they deal with. So the more equipped and the more skills and knowledge they have about advocacy, the better prepared they are going to be to advocate on their own behalf. And as I've said, attend any workshops and conferences that you can, because the more educated you are, the more effective you are. So in preparing for a meeting, so I've said that you could be invited to case conferences, school teams, meetings, individual education plan. So what do you need to know about the meeting? Well, first of all, you need to know the date and the location, but more importantly, what is the purpose of the meeting? Sometimes we get called in and we don't know what it's going to be about. So it's important to ask that question before you attend. The other piece is who will be attending. I've done presentations to school staff, and they say, well, the principal said we were having a meeting about this child. So as a special education teacher, I invited this person and this person and that person because they all have a role in supporting the child. So the next thing you know, you've got 5 or 6 people lined up opposite you, and that can feel really intimidating. So find out about the size of the meeting, who will be there, why they will be there. And one of the best strategies is to take somebody with you to that meeting. So really think about who might be coming on. I don't want to make it adversarial and say on your side, but somebody who is with you at that meeting that can be supportive of you. Next thing is, what information do you need to take with you? So are they going to be referencing a report that's recently been made by a school psychiatrist or psychometrist, some information that they have shared with you and they're now going to use to decide on some programming? The last thing the next thing to think about is what questions you have and you want to ask. So depending on the stage you're at, and particularly at transitions, whether it's between grades, between schools, between elementary and high school, what questions do you have? What do you want to find out in this meeting? And then finally, if they can tell you up front what will happen next. So is this a meeting to decide that the child needs an individual education plan? Or is this the meeting where we're actually going to do the programming suggestions for the individual education plan? At the meeting, I think it's really important to always start the discussion with the student's strengths and areas of success. It's very easy to go into the deep end about what challenges your child has, and it can feel really negative to you. So you have some successes and strengths that you want to share, but it's a really good idea to ask other people if they've seen some areas of success. Your child is changing all the time and they have noticed something that you haven't. So really asking everybody to focus on those strengths is a good way to start any meeting. The next is to listen to the concerns raised by the school staff and ask questions to understand the issue. If there's an issue around behavior, for example, is it that it's happening once a week, once a month, or is it happening every day? If it's happening every day, is it happening at a certain time? Is it a transition that your child's struggling with? Is there something particular going on? So really you need to ask those questions and really make sure you understand the issue and concerns that they have. And then there may be some additional information required. Many of our children with cerebral palsy require the support of a speech-language pathologist. So is there a recent report? If there's issues around behavior, has a behavior analyst been in and looked at some of the triggers and some of the solutions that might be helpful? Or does a referral need to be made to get that information? And then when you're deciding on a plan or future action, it's really important to know who does what when. So if there's some tasks assigned to you, make sure you make note of them and then you follow up. But you also want to know who's going to do the other things. I have been to a lot of really good feel-good meetings where we talked about it. We had lots of good ideas as to what was going to work, and then nothing happened. So the more specific you can be in terms of the action plan and who's going to do it and when they're going to do it, the more likely it is to actually happen. You need to keep a record of the meeting. Somebody may be taking notes that they can share with you, but if not, or even as well, you may want to write your own notes as soon as the meeting has ended. They can just be a few points on a piece of paper that you then add to your binder or scan into your computer, but make sure that this information will help you remember what happened at the meeting. And then really important, ask when we can meet again. So we had that really good meeting. Yep, we're going to do this. But then when I left the meeting, I realized there'd been no plan to get back together and discuss, first of all, whether they'd implemented it, and secondly, whether it was working. So these are really important tips at the meeting. I'm also going to focus on something called active listening. So one of the challenges that we have is that we're likely to be emotional. I can go to meetings about any other child, but once it's about my child, I really struggle because you feel judgment. You think that they're looking at you and thinking you're doing some things wrong. You feel intimidated by them. There's a lot of emotions associated with these meetings. So it's really important that you practice active listening, making sure that you're listening and hearing what everybody else is saying. So one of the first tips is to demonstrate that you are listening. And that may be how you sit, making sure you have eye contact with the speaker. Explore the issue and ask questions to find out more detail. If you're not sure what was said, restate the information and ask whether that was correct. Clarify by telling what you understand is being said, or you can summarize what has been said by the speaker. These are all ways to make sure that you understood what was being said, and if you didn't, they have the opportunity to correct it. After the meeting, follow up on phone calls and meetings. So you've confirmed the next steps and actions, and some of them are for you. One of the ways you can build a positive relationship is send a thank you note summarizing the meeting. And so then they have a record, and if you kept a copy, you have a record of what you think is going to happen. And that can be really important the next time you talk. Complete all the tasks that are identified for your action, and then monitor changes in your child or the school program and track progress for future meetings. So there's quite a few things that you need to do after. If it, instead of being an in-person meeting, this was a phone call meeting, really important to keep a record of who you spoke to, what date and what time. So then you have a reference. You can say that you called the school and you spoke to so-and-so at this time about this issue. If you just said, well, I called and I spoke to somebody, but I'm not sure who they were, that actually damages your credibility. And you want to make them take you seriously, and show them that you're keeping records of what's being said. What do parents need to know? I've talked about understanding your child's diagnosis and what it means and how it will impact the child at school, the child's strengths, their skills or interests, especially with children with behavior challenges. Knowing what their interests are is a really positive way to engage them in the education program. Your child's physical health, learning, or behavior challenges. So again, you need to know about them and be prepared to share information, but really saying the need and really focus on some of the solutions that have worked in the past, so that you can ask for their help with some more solutions, but to demonstrate that it's not a static situation. And most importantly, the special education process. Find out what the rules and roles are in your jurisdiction, so that you're knowledgeable about what can and can't happen with your child. The individual education plan is a tool that is used in many jurisdictions to document the programming that they're going to provide for the child. An individual education plan helps teachers and other staff to understand your child's needs and provides a plan for how they can help the student to learn. It is a written plan, but it's also a living, working document. In Ontario, the IEP is to be reviewed 3 times each year. So at the end of each term, there's an opportunity to look at it. And for sure, you need to be looking at it by the end of that school year and making sure it has the relevant information in it for the next teacher. So it's a living document that's going to change as your child makes progress and as they age. So always think of it as I didn't like what was in it last time, but we're going to look at it again in 12 weeks. This is something I'd like to discuss with them and have added. So it's a living, working document. It is based on assessment of student strengths and needs. So where I talked about your sharing information at the beginning based on your own experience, as your child moves through the school system, there may be some more formal assessments that are being used to determine what level your child is cognitively, to determine what learning strategies will be effective for them. And there may also be some health reports. For example, if you are looking at a surgery, what that surgery is going to impact your child, whether it means that they need to be at home for a period of time, or they'll be in a rehabilitation center for an amount of time. So all of those reports can add information to the child's profile. Most important, as I said, it must be reviewed regularly. So how can you contribute to the IEP? You are the expert on your child and the only person who will be there for their whole education. So you can share information about their strengths and needs, but also the feelings. You know when your child's struggling at school. And sometimes it may be verbal, that they actually are screaming at you, I hate school, I'm not going back. Or it may be by their behavior, that they always have a stomachache on a certain day of the week. Or their nonverbal clues in terms of, you can see that they're really resistant and don't want to do something. So it's really important to probe their feelings in any way you can, so that you know what their experience is, which may raise some concerns in your mind that you need to follow up on. Your thoughts about your child's successes and challenges at school. I knew that my child had a physical disability and a developmental disability. I was not expecting her to graduate from high school. But when we got to high school, I was treated as an adversary by a lot of the high school teachers. I think they thought that I thought she was going to graduate, when it was really clear to me she wasn't. But I have looked at the curriculum. I knew that there were lots of courses that could engage her. Kristen is a hemiplegia, so she certainly walks. She's able to talk and express herself. She has lots of interests. So I looked at the curriculum, and there were a number of courses where I thought she could be very well engaged in. But the high school teachers were a bit fearful about me. Well, she's not going to get a credit. Yeah, I know she's not going to get a credit, but I think it will be a valuable learning experience, and it will help her to build her knowledge as she grows, knowledge that she can use as an adult. You also need to share about challenges at home, things that might have changed, and any reports. And if the equipment needs change over time, you need to be talking to the school about the new equipment, because they may need to get a duplicate piece of equipment for in school. In terms of the individual education plan, accommodations are one of the best, most appropriate ways to support our students. So I have worked with the 3 categories of accommodation that have been identified here in Ontario. The first is instructional accommodations. So how is the teacher going to present the information to the student? The next is environmental accommodations. What changes or supports do we need in the classroom for your child to be successful? And finally, assessment accommodations. How are we going to assess your child so that we can measure whether they're making any progress in the curriculum and they can demonstrate learning? So on this page, I put a few ideas. So for example, with an instructional accommodation, they may need a speech generating device. And the teacher needs to be familiar with working with your child and communicating through any device that they might use. They may need a laptop with modified or large keyboard. They may need activity pacing. So the teacher, instead of giving the instructions at the beginning of the day for a whole bunch of things that needs to be done, they follow up with your child and talk about what the first instruction is first and wait till they have success in that area before they give the next activity. In terms of environmental accommodations, it could be the equipment that's specific to their physical disability. It could be preferential seating. Finally, in terms of assessment, in Ontario for exams, scribes are allowed. And so it was really interesting in the beginning because people thought I could add that as an accommodation, but it's actually a skill that needs to be learned both by the child and by the person who's scribing their work, to make sure that the scribe understands what the child is saying or wants to share, and so that the child learns to be able to give instructions to a second person to express their information on their behalf. And there's lots of alternative formats for presenting and being assessed on learning. Oral presentations, creative expression, whether it's a model you can create. For those that have some computer skills, it may be that they do an alternative demonstration of their learning through their computer. So there's lots of different types of accommodations. It's really important to think about and make sure that they are documented, and then finally they're in place to help your child's learning. So the other role with parents in terms of the IEP is monitoring it. So it may be that you had a plan and some certain things were supposed to happen, and so perhaps a visit to the classroom, perhaps reports from your child, or a follow-up conversation with the teacher, you find out that it didn't happen. So if it didn't happen, what are you going to do about it? Who do you need to talk to? What was the barrier? What was the reason it didn't happen? You need to look at how your child is adjusting. Does it seem like they're being a successful learner and that they're enjoying the program or not? And if not, why not? And you need to sort of investigate that a little bit more deeply so that then when you do the review of the IEP, you have some information to share with them. And making sure that you are consulted on each IEP review. There are some parents who will say, well, my child's got cerebral palsy, for example, and their condition's not going to change, so I don't need to go to so many meetings. But your child is changing in subtle ways. First of all, they are growing. Certainly as they get to adolescence, there's going to be a change in the hormones in their body. There are lots of things happening, and it's important to be able to keep on top of the changes in terms of the programming that's been offered to your child, but also the child's experience in learning. So that monitoring of the IEP is a really important role. So in summary, know your child, their strengths, and how they learn. Understand your child's needs and how his or her needs impact their learning. Find out about supports available for your child, whether that's in the school or in the community. Understand the individual education plan and how it can help your child. Know your role and how you can contribute to your child's education. I've thrown a lot of information at you, and you can get a copy of this presentation and tips to take away. But You are in the driver's seat. You are the expert on your child, and it's really important that you are an advocate for your child. I hope that some of these tips will help you to be more effective. So thank you for listening to me. I've included a couple of Easter Seals resources at the end of my package. The Easter Seals Kids at School website has over 100 articles looking at ways that parents can help their child at school. It might be a useful resource for you. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to hand it back to Jason.
Thank you, Allison, for that wonderfully insightful and thorough review of a topic that has the potential to be very challenging for a lot of people and families of someone with cerebral palsy. That was just wonderful.
Thank you.